Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone to Healing the Rift Between Your Conscious and Subconscious Minds. My name is Charles Jones, and I'm the co-author of Emotional Intelligence for Stress-Free Leadership and the developer of Tenor, which is a method for working with emotion, stress, trauma, and it's also a self-development discipline. And in today's webinar, I'll share a new understanding of emotion, stress, and trauma with you. And this new understanding makes it easier to recognize and to heal. And then I'll show you how you can apply this new understanding to heal your trauma and accelerate your self-development. So before we begin, I'd love to know what, in this case, what brought you here today, since you've already answered the other questions for me. Hannah?
Yeah, I'm super interested in just understanding more of the signs that tell me that my subconscious mind is operating in perhaps like a maladaptive way. So looking to identify that closer to the onset, as opposed to, waiting till things kind of get a little crazy to course correct. So looking to just, understand when the subconscious is running the show in a way that doesn't necessarily align with the way that I would like to think and act and be in the world.
Great. But I want to, I think I want to prepare you for a potential paradigm shift or 180 on your last question. So okay. we'll have fun with that. Right.
Okay, sounds great.
Amir?
Yeah, I'm curious about developing new methods to align conscious and subconscious, and having a more conscious dialogue, I guess, with the subconscious parts.
Great. Well, you're definitely going to get a lot of that today. Gaia?
I'm here to learn. I saw the title and I was very intrigued. So,
okay. Yeah. Great. And Devin?
I would echo everyone else's interests, as well as just knowing how to shift subconscious thought a little bit.
Okay, I'm going to give you the same warning I gave Hannah. So prepare yourself.
Cool.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Thank you. So I'd like to begin with a story, and it's a true story, and it's very meaningful to me because it was a turning point in my life. In the summer of 1982, my parents took my sister and I on a road trip across Western Europe. And one day we were traveling through the Alps. I was driving, and the road was really narrow with a rock wall on one side and a cliff on the other. And unlike this photo, there was no guardrail. And we were stuck behind a truck going up a fairly steep incline. And my father was riding shotgun, the passenger seat, and he was kind of leaning out of his window, looking for an opportunity when I could pull out and pass the truck. Very windy road, there wasn't a lot of visibility. And so he leaned out and he saw that the road turned to the right and it was free of any oncoming traffic. So he told me to go for it, and I did. So I pull out, and if this is the truck and this is me, I pull out from behind the truck. I come alongside it, and to my horror, I see that the road curves to the left. So my father had curved left and then right. My father had seen here, and just as we're turning, I see this truck bearing down, coming downhill, bearing down toward me, and the horns from both these trucks start to honk. So, what do you imagine I was feeling in that moment? If you want, you can take yourself off mute. There's only a few of us, right?
I would say panic is a fair feeling.
Okay. So I wasn't panicking, but I was definitely afraid. Like this just jolt of fear hit me. And I was the most afraid I'd ever felt in my life. Now, here's the question. Why was I afraid?
Imminent death.
Imminent death. Okay. Anything
Death,
else?
responsibility for others, doing the wrong things. You know,
Okay. Responsibility for others, right? Yeah.
I mean, there's no clear way out of that situation with a truck
Okay.
coming forward and a truck.
Right. There's right. There's no obvious way out of it. Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. So the answer that most people will give most of the time is that the reason I'm afraid is because, this truck's bearing down on me and I'm not seeing anywhere to go. That they will actually answer the question in terms of what's happening out there in the world. Okay. And we see this all the time. And people say things like, he made me angry, right? The underlying assumption is that the events that happen in the world have triggered your emotion. So something happened in the world, and then I immediately experienced this emotion. Suddenly I see the truck bearing down on me, and suddenly I'm afraid. So I'm experiencing a painful emotion because of these circumstances. So I call this a circumstantial view of emotion. And it's overwhelmingly the view that most people use to interpret their emotions, particularly the painful ones, most of the time. However, the idea that your emotions are being caused by what's happening in the world is erroneous. And what we'll be showing later in the presentation, it's also the root cause of stress and trauma. So something happens between the moment when the circumstances change and you feel the emotion. And what happens is that your subconscious has made an assessment that you're no longer on track to fulfill a need. Okay, right? So my subconscious works tirelessly to fulfill my needs. And I'll talk more about needs in a second. It concluded I was no longer on track to fulfill my need to keep the assets that I valued most in the world, my life and the life of my family, safe. And as you mentioned, Hannah, there was nothing in my prior repertoire of how to keep myself and other people in the car safe in a situation like this. This is a novel situation, right? At this time, I'm like 20 years old. I've been driving for 4 years. I hadn't encountered anything like this. So my subconscious didn't have a routine, didn't have a way to do this. So the point here is, we've been driving through France and Germany and Switzerland, and that entire time, I say I'm driving, but it's really my subconscious that's driving the car, right? I'm talking to my family, we're listening to music. Your subconscious does 95% of what you say you do. It's just on autopilot, so to speak, until you hit those circumstances where your subconscious doesn't know how to meet your needs in that situation, in which case it needs the help of your conscious mind. It needs the help of this logic, rational ability to analyze a situation and do something about it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about needs here for a second. So the way you could think about it is it's your subconscious's job to fulfill your needs. Some common needs include protecting assets. So that's the need that was at play in the scene in the Alps. Mitigate risks. And unlike the scene in the Alps, which was a clear and present danger, we have this incredible capacity to anticipate situations that might derail us and either prevent those situations from occurring or minimize the damage that would occur to us should the situation actually arise, this capacity to mitigate risks. We have a need to assert our rights, to stand up for ourselves, to, hey, I have this right in this situation. We have a need to elicit the respect and consideration we think we deserve from others. We have a need to uphold our system of ethics, and we have a need to personify our ideals. What does it mean to be a good employee, a good father, a good daughter, whatever it might be? These are 6 of about 80 of these subconscious needs that we have as human beings. I call them psychological needs. And your subconscious is working tirelessly all the time to fulfill these needs. However, when your subconscious detects that you're not on track to fulfill one of these needs, in other words, what it already knows how to do, its subconscious programming doesn't, in case of the Alps, know how to keep me safe and protect the assets of the family, it sends up a distress call from the subconscious to the conscious mind in the form of a painful emotion. So in the Alps, it was fear, okay? This jolt of fear to kind of knock me out of my reverie, whatever it is I was doing or thinking, it can wait, right? We've got an emergency here. Anxiety is not the same as fear. Anxiety alerts you that you're not on track to mitigate a risk that you anticipate could occur. Anger calls on you, say, hey, you're not asserting your rights in this situation. You're not on track. Someone's violated your rights and you're not on track to assert them. Resentment, you're not eliciting the respect and consideration from other people that you think you deserve. Guilt, you're not upholding your system of ethics. Guilt isn't actually about what you did in the past, but we can talk about that later. And shame tells you that your subconscious believes that you have a need to personify a certain ideal. And when you're not personifying that ideal is when you feel ashamed. So these painful emotions are essentially cries for help. They're distress calls. They're requests from your subconscious. They're alerting you that you're not on track to fulfill one of your needs, and they're calling on you, subconscious is calling on you to cooperate with it to get you back on track to meet your needs. Okay, so as I'll explain a little more in the presentation, I don't consider any of these negative or toxic. The negativity and toxicity isn't from the emotion, but from something we do with the emotion. Okay, so Devin and Hannah, I'm going to make the argument that when there's a lack of congruence and alignment and union between your conscious and subconscious minds, it's not your subconscious mind's fault. It's your conscious mind's fault. And the good news of that is that's something you can change. And I'm going to show you what your conscious mind is doing to create this disharmony. And that disharmony leads to stress, and that disharmony is ultimately the cause of trauma. So I call this view, so just to complete this, hang on a second here. So just as your subconscious is generating painful emotions when you're not on track to fulfill a goal, your subconscious generates pleasurable emotions when you are on track to fulfill the goal. So these painful emotions are, whoa, you need to course correct here. The pleasurable emotions are, keep going, you're on the right track, and that's the carrot to keep you on the right track until you fulfill the need, right? So that's the encouragement that you're getting there. So I call what I just described the effectiveness view of emotion. And the experience of life that occurs when you're living through the effectiveness view is very, very different than the experience of life as if you're living through the circumstantial view. And I'm going to describe what those differences are. But before I do, I want to open it up and see if you have any questions about what I have shared so far. Or comments.
On the last slide, I just missed the last of the green column. Do you mind scrolling back?
No, I don't mind scrolling back, and I can, let's see here.
Proud, that's what it is. Virtuous and proud. Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. All right,
So,
any other questions or comments?
so is this a little bit along the Viktor Frankl lines of the space between stimulus and response?
Yes, yes. So what I would say is, like Viktor Frankl, if you are living in the effectiveness view, then you can always resolve a painful emotion, even if you can't change the circumstances. Okay, and maybe I'll go into that a little bit later. Where I think the maybe nuance in it is, sure, between stimulus and response, there's a space and you can make some choices. But the truth is, most of the time, something happens, our subconscious immediately takes action. So a common misconception is that our conscious mind or our emotions drive our behavior, but it's our emotions actually don't drive any behavior. Our conscious mind occasionally drives our behavior, but the vast majority of our behavior is simply driven by our needs and the existing programming we have around the needs. Okay, so in those situations where our subconscious might alert us that the stored protocol for fulfilling a need isn't going to work, then you get this high priority interrupt in the form of a painful emotion from your subconscious, which says, hey, conscious mind, I need your help here. That's the pause, right? So the painful emotion is calling for the pause in which you reflect on your subconscious programming, decide what change you want to make, and then move forward. That answer your question, Amir?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay. All right, anything else? Any other questions? Is this making sense? Is this kind of in the category of the most common feedback I get is, oh my God, this is obvious, but it wasn't obvious to me before you presented it. It's like obvious the moment you say it. And I think it's obvious because it's a discovery rather than an invention, right? I didn't invent these things that are behind our emotions. We have these needs behind the emotions. It took me decades of research to figure out what needs were behind these emotions, but it's a discovery. Like this is how we're wired. This is what it is to be human here. Okay. All right. All right. So let me go onward. So the experience of living through the effectiveness view is much, much better than the experience of living through the circumstantial view. And to see why, I want to return to that scenario in the maps, the situation in the Alps, where I just pulled alongside the truck I was trying to pass, and the ongoing truck is barreling down on me. So fortunately, for reasons I still to this day don't understand, I kind of attribute it to grace, I interpreted my fear through the effectiveness view. I realized that it was alerting me that I wasn't on track to protect my family from harm. And so when I experienced this jolt of fear, I felt afraid, truly more afraid than I ever felt in my life, but I surrendered to it. I allowed the fear to express itself through my body and kind of reorganize me and orient me. And my mind became singularly focused on how am I going to save my life and those of my family. And this energy of the fear lit me up. And the best phrase I can think to describe it is, I felt completely alive, and I felt that I was a force of nature. There was no, my conscious mind and subconscious mind were distinct, but they were in complete alignment and union. Like I was just a force of nature. I was a force to be reckoned with. And the state felt exalted. So in essence, I made this decision to work with my fear, with my subconscious in this situation, right? Now, the conscious mind, the rational mind, it can be very analytical, and but it's very slow. Your conscious mind processes about 40 or 50 pieces of information per second. Your subconscious processes 100,000 pieces of information per second. It's just blazing fast, right? And if you doubt that, if you think about when you learned to drive a car and you were driving your car with your conscious mind, if you've ever, as I'm old enough to have taught some people how to drive a car with their conscious mind, it's terrifying to be in the car with them, because until it becomes part of muscle memory, there's no competence, there's no ease in them driving. So in this state, in the car, I quickly considered my options and realized I had two, okay? And one of those options was slamming on the brakes and sliding back behind the truck that I had just passed, right? And I, as soon as I had this thought, instantly in my mind's eye, I saw our car spinning out of control and tumbling down the cliff face, right? Which I interpret that as my subconscious operating at this blazing speed, took all its past experiences of such things, both personal and watching on TV or whatever, and crunched the numbers, the supercomputer, and said, that ain't gonna work. You're gonna tumble down the thing. So immediately I slammed on the accelerator, and I, as I'm going forward and then angling the car to just miss the truck that's coming toward me and just get past the truck that's on my right, my conscious mind is basically just kind of reveling in the fact that I can hear the Doppler effect of the horn of the vehicle getting closer and this one getting a little further away. I'm actually navigating by the change in frequencies between the truck in front of me and the truck behind me. Like, I've never done this before. Like, it's a level of competence and mastery that I had never had, right? And I'm still in this like sense that I'm this force of nature. And I'm in this, what I describe as like a flow state. There's no tension anywhere in my body. I'm not stressed. I'm high as a kite, really, right? I didn't have another experience like that until years later, after years of meditation, something called Sahaja Samadhi. But I was in this truly exalted state, and I pulled through, and literally inches on either side, and everyone's safe, and driving down the road. And at this point, I start to check in on my family members, and my dad has actually left a dent in the armrest. He's squeezing it so hard. My mom, Catholic, she's like this in prayer, and she was just thanking God that we all went together. And my sister is in a state of catatonic shock in the back seat. But I'm having I've just had the best experience of my life. I've felt the most alive. So when you're interpreting your emotions through the effectiveness view, you work with your emotions, you're fully engaged, you're incredibly effective, and they're very fulfilling experiences. Okay. And have you ever had that kind of experience of, two questions. How many of you can relate to this experience because you've had it yourself or know someone that's had something like this? And the second one, have you ever had this experience of, oh, I could die now and be at peace about it? And it's in those, you have that thought when, ironically, in those moments when you're fully alive and your conscious and subconscious mind are in harmony with each other. So is the state I'm talking about familiar to any of you? Love to hear. Devin?
I was actually trying to wrap my head around like feeling in flow with your emotions, because I feel like sometimes my emotions will like overtake me, but I don't feel like I'm in flow with them. So personally, I can't relate, but I'm trying to wrap my head around it.
Well, I'll explain why you've had that experience.
Cool.
Amir?
So I can definitely relate. And those of you who have not seen the movie Sully, have you seen the movie Sully?
Can you spell that?
Sully.
I haven't.
So Tom Hanks is flying, I want to say an American.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. Yes, the pilot and landing on the,
Pilot.
yes, I have
Yeah.
seen that. That's great.
And
Yes.
landing on the Hudson River, and scientists and whatever trying to analyze if he made the right decisions or the right decision or not. And that's exactly feels like a very visual experience of what you were talking about.
Mhm. Yes.
And I have had, in the moment of making a decision, I don't really know sometimes why I'm making a decision. It don't always even make sense. And in retrospect.
Yeah. Well, your conscious mind is more clever than your subconscious, but your subconscious is more intelligent and knows more than your conscious mind.
Yeah. So my question about it is that, our conscious mind is very sophisticated, and sometimes, especially for people on a journey, the conscious mind will play as if it is the subconscious or higher self, or and how do you know which voice is it? Is it my conscious or my subconscious mind?
So the subconscious speaks to us in typically four different languages. So I focused here on emotions, but another language our subconscious uses to speak to us is the sensations in our body, right? And most of us who've grown up in Western culture, especially America, we haven't left much of our consciousness in our body, right? Our body is this vehicle that we just go through, but it's not something we truly inhabit most of the time, such that we are attending to and aware of the sensations and the energies coursing through our body. So you have sensations, you have emotions, which people are more familiar with, and I'll kind of get to what we tend to do, especially with painful emotions, particularly people who are in the self-growth path more than others, and how they respond to those emotions in such a way that actually causes a disconnect with the subconscious, actually creates rifts with the subconscious. And I'll be talking about that in a minute. Another is we'll get these intuitive images that basically our subconscious places something in our mind's eye for us to look at, like the vision of the car rolling down the hill that was placed there by my subconscious in this process, right? Because I made the decision in collaboration with my subconscious on whether I was going to slam on the brake and slide behind the truck or hit the accelerator and try to go between the trucks, right? This wasn't like I didn't have a piece of paper. Well, what are the pros of this and the cons of this, right? There's no time. I just submitted the idea to my subconscious. I heard from it, I trusted it, and I took the only other alternative, right? And then in addition to the images, sometimes there'll be a lot of what people call ideas or intuitions or kind of a gut. That's another kind of language that our subconscious speaks to us in. Our subconscious is rarely talking to us. If it's a discursive sentence, it's not our subconscious. It's our any kind of negative self-talk isn't from our subconscious. It's the result of interpreting an emotion through the circumstantial view. Okay, so I think let me kind of transition to that. So let's talk about what happens if you interpret a painful emotion through the circumstantial view. So, so an example here would be, in general, when we interpret our painful emotions through the circumstantial view, we think, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I shouldn't have this. How do I get rid of this as fast as possible, right? We see it as something bad. We even call them negative emotions. For example, if we're interpreting our anger through the circumstantial view. So this situation's making me angry. This person made me angry, right? They're causing my emotional pain, right? So the moment you begin to attribute the cause of your emotional pain to a situation, another person, you're going to feel animosity toward that person, right? This is they're causing you pain. That's what you believe in that moment. And, so in the case of anger, you might acquiesce. Okay, look, I'm going to acquiesce to being treated badly or not, in this way, or you're going to retaliate against them. So anger in that case will tend to lead to conflict and violence and a lot of animosity and whatnot. But if you're viewing your anger through the effectiveness lens, then what your anger is saying is, hey, you believe you have a right in the situation. You're not on track to assert it. So conscious mind, examine, do we really have this right? Would the other person agree I have this right? How do I become more skillful at asserting this right? And then the anger is still a fighting energy, but you are fighting for your rights rather than fighting against the other person. So a really good situation, really good example of this is, if you haven't seen it, is the movie Gandhi. And in the movie Gandhi, Gandhi was a famously intensely angry man, but the behaviors we tend to associate with someone who's angry, he only exhibits once in the movie, and that's toward his wife. Toward the British, he didn't see himself as fighting against the British. He saw himself as fighting for the right of the Indian people to govern themselves. And the emotion that arises when you're in that state is one of empowerment. As you can see through the movie, if you watch it, he's just this exemplar of an intensely angry, is intensely angry for pretty much 10 years. But that anger is just keeping him on track to asserting the right of self-determination for the Indian people. Ditto for Martin Luther King, ditto for Nelson Mandela. You can read their biographies. They describe themselves as intensely angry men. So from the effectiveness view, anger is this life-serving force without rights to structure our society. The entire legal profession is based on rights. Then society literally collapses. And if we didn't have anger to call on us to alert us when we're not on track to assert our rights, there'd be no point sort of in having rights. So in the effectiveness view, anger is a life-serving energy. But through the circumstantial view, it's a train wreck. It's a place that you would not want to go down. Does that the example make sense?
That makes me angry.
It makes you angry?
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. All right. Right. Exactly. Right. That would be a circumstantial, sort of interpretation. But I have had people say, "Why didn't anyone tell me this sooner? I had a right to know." Oh, that's why I'm angry. I had a right to know, and I, somehow didn't manage to assert that right. Okay, good. All right. Let me give you another example. There's a lot of talk these days about how toxic shame is, right? But what makes shame toxic isn't the emotion, it's the interpretation through the circumstantial view. Because if you're interpreting your shame through the circumstantial view, you're hearing the shame as, there's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I'm too much, whatever it might be. If you're interpreting it through the effectiveness view, it's like, okay, I have some subconscious programming that says, these are the ideals I'm trying to personify and live into. Let me go ahead and examine that. Oh, one of the ideals is that I should be blonde and a size 2 and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I didn't choose that ideal. That's just programming I've inherited from my society. I don't think I want to inherit that. I don't think I want to preside. I'm going to drop my need to personify that ideal. I'm going to change the ideal. Maybe I'll change it to, I want a body that's fit, right? Or one that I saw play out in my lifetime. When I was going to school, I went to school in West Virginia. One of my best friends was gay. Well, to be homosexual back then was shameful. And the only thing worse, more shameful than being homosexual was letting people know that you were homosexual, right? And his name was David, and like we were really close. I never bought into that, and I was always a scientist. I knew there were these variants, and it wasn't like something you choose. But in 1968 in San Francisco, there was a guy, Kearney, who's homosexual, realized he was ashamed of being homosexual and said, why am I ashamed of being homosexual? I think our society has got this wrong. I don't think the ideal when it comes to sexual orientation should be heteronormative. I think it should be authenticity. I think you should be what you are. And he coined the phrase, gay is good. And that eventually led to the whole gay rights movement, gay pride parade, where let's be proud of what we actually are when it comes to that. And in my opinion, it's been a very humanizing force in society. But this only came about because this person didn't accept the circumstantial view of shame, but rather that, oh, I have some programming that I inherited from my culture that isn't serving me, that's maladaptive. So Hannah, your question, these kind of maladaptive things that we do are due to our subconscious programming, but we have the power to reflect on it and update the subconscious programming so that we behave more adaptively, more in harmony with our values going forward. And rather than having to run every instance of that through our conscious mind, every time it shows up, if you change the subconscious programming once, you behave differently from there on in. For example, I had a client, a woman who said to me, she said, I'm angry with my husband all the time. Why are you angry? And she gave me this whole story about him and what he did and what he didn't do. And I said, okay, let me help you out with this. Anger is telling you you're not on track to assert a right. What right do you believe you have that isn't being honored in this situation? And so I see her thinking about it in my mind, the Jeopardy clock is playing. I see the light bulb go off, and then instantly her cheeks flush with blood. She's embarrassed. And I said, okay, what'd you find? And she said, I love the way she said this. She said, well, my subconscious believes that I have a right to expect that my husband will anticipate what I need and provide it to me. And this is the important part, before I have to ask. And I'm like, how's that working for you? She said, terrible. We are separated and we're about to get divorced. And I said, where did this belief you have this right come from? Did you and your husband negotiate it? The rights are social agreements. Did you come to this agreement? She said, no, I inherited it from my mom. Well, did it work for your mom? Yeah, Dad agreed. She had that right. So they played that game. Well, you think you can talk your current husband to play that game? She said, no way, not a chance. What are you going to do? I'm going to drop the idea I have this right. 2 months later, I get an email from her. They've rescinded the separation. They're doing really well. And so just that one little change. Okay, starting to make sense? Okay, all right. So if you're interpreting your emotions through the circumstantial view, you're going to fight against them. And my guess is, all of you have one or more strategies for how to fight against your emotions. You might suppress them, or you might try to rationalize them away. Try to reach for the better feeling thought. What are some other tapping? What are some other things that you do to kind of get yourself out of these, quote, negative emotions? And anyone have another technique that they tend to use? Look on the bright side. Count to 10. Practice mindfulness. Do some cognitive reframing. Did I miss any that any of you use to, quote, manage your painful emotions and your negative emotions? Did that cover it? Okay, so those are actually all ways of fighting against your subconscious, right? You are fighting with your emotions. You are not saying, you're not welcoming the fear as, thank you for alerting me to the fact that we're not on track to protect an asset. So we fight against our emotions, and that in turn creates stress. Okay, so stress isn't between you and your environment. Stress is between the conscious and subconscious minds. And symptoms of stress are tension. Anytime you have tension in your body, it's because your conscious mind is trying to suppress the physiological expression of the emotion. You know, if your jaws are tight because you're trying to suppress some frustration or anger, right? If your tummy's in a knot, it's not because you're anxious, it's because you're trying to keep your anxiety at bay. You're tense between the shoulders, also usually anxiety, as an example. And so anytime we are storing any kind of tension in the body, that's because we're trying to suppress the physiological expression of an emotion. Reactivity, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or some people say fight, flight, freeze, appease. These are all reactions. Well, they actually, they're two things. They point to unhealed trauma. We have these reactions because we have unhealed trauma. But the reactivity that happens in the moment isn't because of the intense emotion we're experiencing. Let's take the situation where I was in the Alps. If I ignored my fear, if I said it was all going to turn out okay, if I did something to try to keep my fear at bay, or I didn't acknowledge that I was afraid, then my subconscious is like, hey, I'm trying to get your attention. You're not listening. So I'm going to yell louder. I'm going to ramp up the fear. So panic is actually a consequence of we haven't been listening, right? So after a certain point, the subconscious says, look, I know I don't know how to solve this problem, but if you're not going to get on the job, I just got to do the best I know how to do. And it's usually a fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. So if you want to eliminate that kind of reactivity, the moment you start feeling yourself being agitated, chaotic, or reactive, if you actually say, ideally out loud, I'm afraid, I feel angry, I'm ashamed. The moment your subconscious hears, if you correctly identify the emotion, the moment your subconscious hears what you said, it will become composed. It will turn behavioral control over to you because you're on the job. But it can't afford to do that if you don't know what's going on and have agreed to do something about it. This particular thing of labeling your emotions to calm your affect is multiple scientific studies confirming it. In fact, it's so well documented at this point, there's a name it to tame it aphorism. Name the emotion to tame the reactivity. So reactivity is a form of stress. It's telling you that you're fighting against your emotions. So Hannah, your question, how do you decrease the amount of time that passes before you wake up to the fact that your conscious minds and subconscious minds are in conflict? Tension, reactivity, blaming the situation, someone else, or your own shortcomings for why you're in emotional pain, right? It's like you're projecting the cause of it out onto the way things are. If you think you're in emotional pain because of the way things are, you're in this state of blame. That's stressful. And the problem being caught up in this point of view is if you can't change the circumstances, like Viktor Frankl, then you are powerless. You then believe you are powerless to resolve your emotional pain. And what will you do? You might try to distract yourself, or you'll drink alcohol, or take Xanax, or smoke marijuana, do anything to change the neurochemistry so that the pain, the emotional pain, isn't overwhelming and ruining everything else you're trying to do. You'll try to numb yourself out, right? But that's dangerous, right? Often what we do is dangerous. It can create dependency, and you're doing nothing to help your subconscious get back on track to meet these very important psychological needs of yours. A fifth example of stress is reluctance. This could show up as procrastination, or it could be you're about to send that email and there's this little niggle in your subconscious. And you can't figure out why your subconscious has a reservation, and you go ahead and press send anyway. And then a few hours later, you learn why your subconscious had the reservation, and you think to yourself thoughts like, I should have known better. I should have listened to my gut. I should have listened to my intuition. It often leads to regret when we push through those subconscious niggles. The niggles aren't always right, but they're always worth considering because this pattern recognition machine we call our subconscious is much faster at anticipating issues, unintended consequences, things that could be obstacles in the future. It's really worth listening to. Any questions on that? Okay, so then the next thing is this conflict, this tension, this disharmony between your conscious and subconscious minds. Anytime you're experiencing any of these, anytime you're trying to ignore, suppress, rationalize away an emotion, you disassociate from that emotion. Okay, I'm dis-associate from that emotion. You know, it's not like somebody you're bringing closer, but it's more like unfriending them on Facebook, right? Ideally. And that is trauma. Trauma is not what happens to us. Trauma is what we do within ourselves in response to what happens to us. So we're in a terrible situation. We don't know how to resolve our fear. The fear is overwhelming us. The only thing we know how to do to survive is to just cut off the fear, push it away, separate ourselves from it, exile it to its own part, if you're familiar with IFS, right? But so when we do that, we are disassociating not only from the emotion, but from the life-serving needs behind the emotion. If you disassociate often enough from your fear, your need to protect your assets, the things that you value, goes offline. And then you're surprised that a similar kind of terrible thing happens to you again. Well, it's because the part of your awareness that would be watching out for that has been offline, right? And this in turn leads to behavioral health issues, negative self-talk, what scientists call brooding rumination, which is the root cause of 70% of behavioral health issues, low self-esteem, imposter syndrome, compulsive behaviors, hypervigilance, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, shadow issues. You know, you think about the number of Indian yogis who have come over here and talked about vows of brahmacharya and how, you know, lust is something you shouldn't have, who end up sleeping with their students. That's a shadow issue. That comes from this. Being partsy, you know, you're in a social group, something happens, it's not okay with you, but you tell yourself, I'm going to be polite here. And polite, you should know, is an acronym for pissed off later in the evening, right? That's being partsy, you know, showing up one way in one situation, Dr. Jekyll in one situation, and Mr. Hyde somewhere else, because these needs don't really go away. But if you don't allow them a seat at the round table, they have to sort of take matters into their own hands when your guard is down. Anxiety disorders, depression, binging, substance abuse, self-harm, an ability to just move on, right? The ability to fully grieve and move on. These are all consequences of interpreting your painful emotions through the circumstantial view. So, two very different paradigms relating to your emotions, two very different experiences of life. So, as such, I think the most valuable thing you can do for yourself, if you want to live with less stress, heal your trauma, be more fulfilled, more engaged, more effective in life, is to shift the paradigm, the embodied paradigm you have on how you interpret your emotions from the circumstantial view to the effectiveness view. I started working on this whole line of research after that experience in the Alps in 1982. Actually did an independent study in college, continued the research afterwards. And in the last decade, I developed a technique called Tenor, which systematically changes your mindset from the circumstantial view to the effectiveness view. And I make my living teaching people tenor and coaching them in the application of tenor to their specific situation. So that's the presentation. I'd like to open up to any additional questions you have or comments, feedback.
This is fascinating. I learned and hold the thought that the interpretation before an emotion is, so an emotion is already a subject to some interpretation. And once the emotion is triggered, there's not much that can be done, but I can see here all the different mechanisms that can be used even after an emotion is already activated.
Yeah. Thank you, Amir. I like that feedback. So I believe the way this works is the subconscious is generating the emotion. Now, the emotion is an assessment. It's an assessment that you're not on track to fulfill a need, given the programming the subconscious has. Okay. And that programming is, what are the situations in which I need to activate the need to protect an asset of mine? Okay. What are the tactics I use in such a situation to protect those assets? That's already part of, when we're born, when babies are born, we recognize loud noises and heights as situations in which we need to protect our assets. All other fears are learned, so to speak. Okay. And then the third piece of programming is, how do you know whether you're on track or not to protect your assets? How do you know you're on track to get to the appointment on time? If you're convinced that, okay, I'm not going to achieve my goal, frustration's the emotion associated with achieving goals. I'm frustrated because I just hit traffic. I'm not going to get to my appointment on time. What tells me that, well, I hit traffic. I'm not driving the speed limit. Is that really the best way to evaluate whether you're on track? No, let me call my GPS. Oh, it says despite the traffic jam, I'm still going to get there on time. I don't have to be frustrated, right? So the assessment isn't always right, but it's an assessment, and it's calling on the conscious mind to either change the subconscious programming, which in turn will change the assessment, right? So another way to think about this is that, and so everything I showed you so far, I can prove. There's like studies of universities and stuff like that. This next piece is a hypothesis that in the absence of emotion, there's no reason for the mind to think, the conscious mind to think. Okay, so our emotions call on us, pleasurable and painful, to make a decision, right? Painful emotions call on us to make a decision. The value of the pleasurable emotions is, hey, conscious mind, if you have time, if you're not otherwise occupied with saving your family from dying in the Alps, I'd really like you to take this moment to appreciate the pleasure of listening to the Doppler effect and this wonder and awe you have of the whole scene. And the more you savor that, the more neurons that fire together, wire together, the more of what you're doing that's working well will be reinforced in the brain. Okay, so savoring our pleasurable emotions increase, strengthen, fortify what's the subconscious programming that's already working well for us. Okay, so if you think about these emotions, painful emotions are calling on you to make a decision. And to put it crudely but memorably, it's basically, hey, look, shit or get off the pot. You're angry, either figure out how to assert your right here or drop your need to assert the right here. Next, right? So don't wallow in these things. If it's chronic, it's because the conscious mind isn't doing its job of properly processing the distress call from the subconscious. Any other questions, comments?
It was only that simple.
What's that?
If it was only that simple.
Well, I believe it is. In fact, I believe prior to 2,600 years ago, human beings interpreted their emotions through the effectiveness view. But beginning about 2,600 years ago, we started it's kind of like, it's kind of like the, COVID-19, right? You had a mutation in coronaviruses, same class of viruses, the common cold. And, the conditions were right for that variation to spread. So I think the conditions were right 2,600 years ago for this new way of interpreting our emotions, the circumstantial view, to spread. And it's now the dominant view through which people in industrialized societies interpret their emotions. Most emotions, most of the time, in particular the painful ones, in particular things like, we did a study with 1,000 employees at a Fortune 500 company. And it turns out when it comes to frustration, 50% interpret frustration as telling them that someone won't cooperate with them. They're frustrated because someone won't cooperate with them, or the world won't cooperate with them. Then 50% interpret it as, oh, I'm not on track to achieve a goal. Amongst this 50%, virtually all the executives interpreted their frustration through the effectiveness view. Otherwise, they wouldn't get to be executives because frustration is about achieving goals. But when we did the same test with anger, we had 3 out of 1,000 people that recognized that their anger was telling them that they weren't on track to assert a right they believed they had. So we don't get this education. Worse, we get the education that these things are bad. If you go into classrooms now, there's all these things about what the kids should do if they feel angry, which is basically separate the kids so they don't hurt anyone from anyone else, or just subdue the anger, take some deep breaths. But instead, if that teacher were to encourage the students to have a conversation about rights, right? And the need to assert our rights shows up at 2. We call it the terrible twos, but it's really the dawning of autonomy. It's really the dawning of, hey, I have a right to take up space and make some of my own choices and this, that, and the other. Then the teacher have a very productive conversation in which every time a child is angry, that's an opportunity for the entire class to have a discussion about who has what rights in what situation, and become a civil, a civil society. So as you can tell at this point, this is a cause for me, right? My colleagues and I at the Institute for Adaptive Mastery, we are on a crusade to change the paradigm through which humanity relates to its emotions. And if we do, there'll be less stress, there'll be less trauma, there'll be more fulfillment, and as a species, we'll be far more adaptable because we'll constantly be examining our subconscious programming. And unlike people that lived 1,000 or 5,000 years ago, the circumstances are changing extremely fast. So we need to be updating the subconscious programming quickly. And Tenor is a way to do that.
So it's beautiful. And I have some ideas and thoughts that I don't want to put on the recording here.
Yes.
So we'll, when we'll wrap up, we can spend another minute.
All right, wonderful, Amir. Any other, so I guess to close out, why don't we go around to the Zoom, and I'd love for each of you to share the most valuable thing, or the biggest aha, or the biggest surprise, or the burning question you have, what did you get out of today? What are you leaving with? Let's start with Hannah.
So something that I've noticed about myself is that I do tend to dissociate pretty quickly. I can recognize myself there, but I didn't know that, like, ignoring, rationalizing, and there was a third word that you used that I didn't jot down, but that those actions with my emotions are the root cause of that outcome. So I'm definitely grateful for having been here and learned that, and we'll just apply what I've learned moving forward. And thank you very much. This has been a profound and wonderful session, Charles.
Thank you, Hannah.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Gaia?
I am sensing some kind of clarity. A lot of the time, I feel like I can get very stressed when I'm looking from the circumstantial view. And so I'll sort of shut down, say, okay, what do we do now? I don't know what to do. I can't do this. And like get very sort of anxious, and I'll feel like my body is sort of freezing, and taking a moment to actually step back, say, okay, I'm feeling these emotions, not just the stress. The stress is being caused by these emotions. What can I do? So this is definitely a tool that I will use in the future. And
Yeah,
I agree with
yeah.
Hannah.
So
It was a very,
I don't know if I misheard you or not, but the stress is not being caused by the emotion. The stress is being caused by you fighting with the emotion.
yes.
It's a paradigm shift. It's do you know this where you look at this thing and you see a vase, and then you see two faces, and then you see a vase, right? You can't see the vase and the two faces at the same time.
Yeah.
That's what this is like. You know, when you learn tenor and you start shifting from the circumstantial to the effectiveness view, initially it's like you're switching back and forth between the vase and the two faces until the vase becomes stable. But it's a process. This is deeply ingrained. In fact, I'd argue it's the deepest part of our mindset, because it's the translation of feeling into thought. It's at the juncture between the subconscious mind and the conscious mind. It's very deep. So the bad news is it's going to take a long time. This isn't going to be a week. There's going to be years to really fully change the mindset. The good news is even a small change in the mindset cascades out to profound changes in your life. For example, the woman that thought she had a right to expect her husband to, provide her with what she needed before she asked. That single change from the circumstantial to the effectiveness view saved her marriage.
Yes.
Devin?
I had several aha moments I felt throughout this, and I appreciated your approach with just being very a little bit more formal about it. Like, this is what this is and this is what this is, because I tend to overthink and get emotional quickly. And I was sort of raised to not process emotions. Like, emotions are not okay. You are like tiptoe around big emotions. And I have a lot of.
So Devin, that's the
Yeah.
trauma.
Yeah.
That's the trauma pattern.
Yeah. I have a lot of big emotions, and I've just, you name it, I'll use it to numb and not feel my emotions. So I think just learning the difference between like acknowledging my emotions and like not trying to rationalize them, maybe like you were saying. I think I had a little bit of the same aha moment as Hannah with like the difference in, on the spectrum of like rationalizing the emotion and maybe diminishing it versus like sitting in it for too long and still not processing it either. So finding that sweet spot.
So without these, so even if you can hold, when you have a painful emotion, oh, my subconscious believes I'm not on track to fulfill a need of mine. Even if you don't know what the need is, just being able to hold that and kind of hold space for yourself of, okay, what need am I trying to fulfill in this situation? That can keep you out of the circumstantial view. It's difficult to plunge completely into the effectiveness view until you have the decode for the emotion, right? So I've given you the decode for 6 of them. And if you haven't already taken a screenshot, why don't you go ahead and do that? You could take a screenshot here of 6 of these. Obviously, there's a lot more, and I chose these 6 for this particular audience. Like when I work in corporations, we have frustration. Disappointment has to do with investment. We have different needs that tend to be more at play. But people can really get caught up. And, the one I don't have here probably is grief, that a lot of people will interpret through the circumstantial view. But the decodes are really valuable and important and can really help you in, cementing that shift. My other experience is that once someone's gone through the tenor process with regard to an emotion and landed in the need, and then actually succeeded in fulfilling the need, just that one success. So my wife is trained in this as well, and one of our favorite aphorisms is, fulfillment is the greatest healer. And it's actually by getting in there, recognizing what the need is, taking responsibility for it, figuring out how to fulfill it. When you have that fulfillment, then it starts to heal the rift, especially if you savor the fulfillment with your subconscious mind. And subsequent to that, the next time you have that painful emotion, you're a lot more confident of your ability to go through the process and get to a fulfilling thing on the other end. Whereas if you're stuck in the circumstantial group view, basically the best case scenario is you get rid of the emotion, right? In the effectiveness view, the best case scenario is that you end up fulfilling the underlying need, and in the process, wiring yourself so you're more effective in similar situations going forward, right? So it's a big win.
Yeah, that's
right?
great.
The
Thank you.
circumstantial view, you just try not to lose. The
Right.
effective view, you want to win, right? You want to be a fully alive, integrated, fulfilled, competent, effective human being. It's just way more fun. Right.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So in closing, I'm going to share a poem, which I'm sure many of you know, but I think you're going to experience this poem differently as a consequence of this presentation. So the poem is called The Guest House by Rumi. This human being is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from your subconscious, from beyond. Thank you very much.